Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world.
It's really good to be back.
So usually, when we start these deep dives, I have this massive stack of books in front of me.
Right.
I've got articles, I've got maybe a documentary queued up, and we try to synthesize a really broad topic like supply chain logistics or the future of AI.
You usually have a whole library.
Exactly. But today actually feels a lot different. I have exactly one document sitting here.
And it is definitely not a thick one.
No, it's thin. It's barely a pamphlet, honestly. But having read it and having spent the last week trying to digest it, I mean, it feels heavier than almost anything we've covered in a really long time.
Well, density isn't really about page count, right? It's about the concentration of truth.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. We are looking at a text called Lectures on Liberation.
Right.
These are the very first lectures given by Angela Davis at UCLA. This is the fall of 1969.
1969, yeah.
And before we even open the first page, we really have to talk about the premise of this show.
The framing.
Right, the crisis in perception framing.
Yeah.
Because if you are listening to this right now and you see Angela Davis and slavery in the title of this duck dive, you might be thinking, okay, I know this story.
Sure.
You know, slavery was bad and Lincoln freed the slaves and then civil rights happened, so let's just move on.
And that right there is exactly the crisis we are trying to solve today.
Right.
It's the perception that slavery is just this historical event, like a sad chapter in a middle school history book,
Right.
rather than an operating system that literally designed the modern world.
An operating system.
Yes, because we are not doing a standard BIC review today.
No, not at all.
We aren't here to critique her prose style or anything like that. We operate on the maxim that books are entry points.
Identity equals systems.
Exactly. Identity equals systems. So we are going to use this text to perform a systems-level institutional analysis.
A structural diagnosis of racialized domination.
Yeah, we're going to open up the machinery and look at how the gears actually turn.
And to do that, I think we need to set the scene.
We do.
Because the context of this lecture is honestly almost as explosive as the content itself.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's 1969, Los Angeles. What is the actual vibe on campus?
The vibe is, I would say, distinct paranoia mixed with distinct revolution.
Right.
You really have to understand that Angela Davis isn't just some regular professor at this moment. She is a total flashpoint.
She's an acting assistant professor in the philosophy department, right?
At UCLA.
Yeah.
And she is brilliantly qualified. I mean, she studied under Marcuse in Europe.
The department actively wants her there.
They desperately want her. But the regents of the University of California are actively trying to destroy her career.
Before she even teaches a single class.
Literally before she ever steps up to the podium.
Yeah.
And it is not because she's incompetent or unqualified.
It's purely political.
Entirely. It's because she is a member of the Communist Party.
Right, right.
So the regents are trying to fire her on those political grounds.
So she is walking into Royce Hall to give this inaugural lecture, and essentially the state is just breathing down her neck.
The state, the FBI, local police, everyone. And yet she walks into that hall, and there's something like 1,500 people waiting for her.
Standing room only.
Students, faculty, community members.
It's basically a rock concert for philosophy.
It really is. It's this massive vindication of academic freedom. But what's fascinating is what she does next.
Yeah, she doesn't take the bait.
Exactly. She doesn't make the lecture about herself. She doesn't stand up there and complain about her job security or the regents.
She pivots.
She pivots immediately to what she calls the forbidden history. She essentially says, I am going to teach you about the Black experience in America, but we are not just memorizing dates and names.
Right.
She says, I'm going to teach you the philosophy of the slave.
And that is exactly where we are going to live for the rest of this deep dive.
Yes.
We are going to break this institutional machinery down into a clear roadmap.
Design incentives, outcomes, persistence, and finally, interconnection.
So let's start with the design.
The literal, legal, and structural setup of the system.
Right when Davis starts, she hits us right away with something she calls the paradox of Western freedom.
And this is a really hard pill for a lot of people to swallow.
Because of the mythology we're raised on.
Exactly. We are raised on a very specific diet of patriotic mythology. We are taught from childhood that the West, specifically Europe and America, is the absolute birthplace of freedom.
The land of the free, it's literally in the anthem.
Right. We're told that freedom is this unique invention of Western civilization, that the Western concept of man with a capital M.
The very definition of what it means to be human.
Yes, it is entirely rooted in the idea of inalienable freedom. The theory goes that if you aren't free, you aren't fully a man.
But then there's the reality on the ground.
The reality is that this supposed birthplace of freedom was built directly on the back of the most brutal industrialized system of unfreedom in human history.
So she takes us back to ancient Greece first to make this point.
Which is the perfect starting point because we love to talk about Athenian democracy, the Politis.
The literal cradle of democracy.
But you have to ask who was actually in the cradle.
A tiny, tiny minority.
A tiny minority of free male citizens. The vast majority of the population were women who obviously weren't citizens and slaves.
Right.
And if you weren't Greek, you were a barbarian. You were seen by the philosophers as naturally fit for slavery.
So from the very beginning of this Western tradition, freedom was an exclusive club.
It was a VIP section. It was never a universal right.
And then she fast forwards to the American founding, which is where I think we really need to slow down and look at the structural design.
Yes.
Because we have Thomas Jefferson. We have the founding fathers writing these incredibly beautiful sentences about liberty.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Right. And while Jefferson is literally sitting at his desk writing that sentence, what is happening outside his window?
He owns people.
He owns hundreds of people.
And he doesn't just own them like some awkward historical footnote. His entire economic existence, his wealth, his ability to sit in a quiet room and write philosophy.
It's all completely predicated on forced labor.
Yes. The labor of human beings he legally classifies as property.
See, this is the cognitive dissonance that always confuses me when I look at this era. How do you write all men are created equal and then go authorize the whipping of a human being? Did they just not see the contradiction?
Oh, they saw it.
Oh.
They absolutely saw it. And Davis points to the drafting of the Constitution as the ultimate proof that they saw it.
The forensic analysis of the text.
Exactly. It's a fascinating bit of legal architecture. If you look at the original text of the U.S. Constitution and you hit Control-F for the word slave.
I mean, it has to be in there, right? The Fugitive Slave Act, the 3/5 Compromise.
Look for the actual word, S-L-A-V-E.
I'm trying to picture the document in my head. Is it actually there?
It is not. The word slave does not appear a single time in the original document.
Wait, really? How do you legally regulate an entire system of slavery without writing the word slavery?
Use euphemisms. Use extreme legal circumlocution. Well, for the 3/5 Compromise, they refer to, quote, other persons.
Either persons.
And for the Fugitive Slave Clause, they call them a, quote, person held to service or labor.
Person held to service or labor. That sounds like a butler. Or contracted intern.
Exactly. And Davis argues this was entirely intentional by the framers. She says they used these euphemisms to, quote, protect the institution without marring the beauty of the document.
Oh, they're ashamed of it.
They were deeply ashamed. They knew that if they wrote the word slavery in the permanent ink of the Constitution, it would permanently stain the grand concept of Western freedom.
So they just hid it in the language.
Yes.
That's essentially a massive cover-up. It's a PR move from 200 years ago.
But it's more than PR. It's an ontological trick. Because think about the logic. If the philosophical essence of man is freedom, and these black people are clearly not free, then the system has to decide something.
It has to resolve the paradox.
Right. Either the system is lying about what freedom is, or these black people are not men.
And they chose the second option.
They chose option B. The very design of the system required the invention of the non-human.
The non-human.
The slave could not be a citizen, could not be a man, could not be a person. Legally and philosophically, the slave had to be a thing.
And this naturally leads us into the economic design, the concept of chattel.
Chattel slavery.
Which is a term you hear constantly in history classes, but I don't think we ever really unpack it. What does it actually structurally mean to be chattel?
It means you are movable property.
Like livestock.
Like a cow or a piece of farm equipment.
Mm-hmm.
The economic design demanded the total reduction of human personality into sheer capital.
Right.
Davis quotes Frederick Douglass on this, and the quote is just devastating. He says, quote, personality swallowed up in the sordid idea of property. Manhood lost in chattelhood.
Manhood lost in chattelhood.
Now think about the spatial implications of that design.
Yeah.
Davis talks about how the slave functions as a fixture.
A fixture? You mean like a light fixture?
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
Pegged to a specific spot for the utility of the owner.
I see.
Because if you are a free person listening to this right now, think about the last vacation you took. You went on a journey. What did that feel like?
It feels exciting. You're exploring. You have the agency to choose where to go and what to see.
Exactly. For a free subject, a journey is an affirmation of your own agency. You move to physical space to discover the world and yourself.
But for a fixture.
For a fixture, travel is a nightmare.
Because the only reason you are moving is if you are being sold.
Yes. Davis calls the slave's journey a, quote, journey into hell.
Right.
Because if you are moving, it means you are being forcibly torn away from your mother, your wife, your children. You are being shipped down the river to the deep south.
So the journey itself is a mechanism of alienation.
It is the ultimate spatial alienation.
I really want to pause on this specific idea of alienation, because I think this is where the theoretical critique of the non-human gets incredibly real and grounded.
It stops being abstract philosophy.
Exactly. There is a story in the text, Davis brings it up, about Frederick Douglass's grandmother.
Betsy Bailey.
Right. And I think we really need to walk through this, because when I read this part of the lecture, I honestly had to put the text down.
It is easily one of the most harrowing examples of structural cruelty in American literature.
So set the scene for the listener. Who exactly is this woman?
So this is Betsy Bailey, Douglass's grandmother. And you have to understand her position. She wasn't just some random worker in the field. She was essentially the matriarch of the entire plantation.
She was the infrastructure.
She was. Davis mentioned she was an incredible master fisher. She made the best nets in the county. She caught the fish that quite literally fed the master's table.
She planted the gardens.
And much more importantly than that, she, quote, peopled the plantation.
Which is a horrifying euphemism in itself.
She gave birth to the workforce. She had daughters who then had grandchildren. She rocked the master's children to sleep. She rocked her own grandchildren to sleep.
She served this one specific master from the day he was born until the day he died.
She was the constant presence.
Okay, so if you believe the whole antebellum myth of the good master and the loyal, faithful servant, she should be the one who gets rewarded at the end of her life, right?
You would think so.
Mm.
But then the old master dies, and the property is divided up among the heirs.
Right.
And the new master, who is the grandson of the man she literally raised, looks at her. And what does he structurally see?
He just sees an old woman.
No, he sees a broken tool.
Mm.
She is too old to work in the fields anymore.
Yeah.
She's too old to bear any more children. Her market value is essentially zero.
Actually, it's less than zero, right? Because she requires food and shelter.
Exactly. On the ledger, she is now a liability. She is purely an expense.
So what does the grandson do? Does he let her retire in a cabin on the property?
No. That would mean treating her like a human being who deserves rest.
Right.
He treats her like chattel, like a depreciated asset. He takes her out to the woods.
The woods.
He builds this tiny, crude mud hut deep in the forest, miles away from her children, miles away from the community she spent her entire life building.
And he leaves her there.
He just leaves her there, totally alone, to die.
Oh.
Douglass writes about this in his narrative, imagining her out there. She's blind, or at least going blind. She's just listening to the wind. She's calling out for her children, but they've all been sold off or they're working miles away and can't come to her.
She is just left to rot.
Because she is no longer useful capital.
It's so cold. It's purely industrial.
So that is the logic of the system. That's exactly what Davis is screaming at us to see here.
It's not about individual morality.
Exactly. It's not just that the grandson was uniquely evil or a cruel man. It's that the institutional system of chattel slavery fundamentally has no category for an elderly human who needs care.
It only has a category for depreciated asset.
And you discard depreciated assets. You throw them on the scrap heap.
So this thing, terrification, this turning of a complex human person into an object, it isn't just a philosophical insult. It's literally a death sentence.
Yes. It is a calculated mechanism of alienation. Obviously, it alienates the grandmother from her family and her life. But Davis points out something crucial here. It also alienates the master from his own humanity.
The master? How so?
Davis calls this the vicious circle. Think about it. To do that to a woman who raised you and fed you, you have to actively kill something inside yourself.
You have to suppress your own natural conscience.
You have to. The master creates the subhuman slave by becoming subhuman himself. To justify the extraction, you have to become a monster.
That is a brilliant and terrifying insight. And I think it's the perfect segue to phase 2 of our roadmap, which is outcomes.
The outcomes of this structural design.
Right, because if the institutional design is to turn living people into objects, there is one massive, unavoidable design flaw in the system.
The human brain.
Exactly. You can legislate that a person is a tractor all you want, but a tractor doesn't think. A tractor doesn't sit in the field and wonder, why am I a tractor?
And that brings us directly to what Davis calls the embargo on information.
The embargo.
If you are the one running this system, your absolute biggest threat is consciousness.
You have to keep the software from updating.
You have to brutally enforce ignorance at all costs.
Which leads to another incredible Douglas moment that Davis highlights. It's the moment he realizes exactly why he's being kept ignorant.
The massive aha moment.
Right. So Douglas is a boy. He's been sent off to Baltimore to live with Hugh Auld and his wife, Sophia.
And Sophia Auld is an interesting variable here because she has never actually owned a slave before.
Right. She hasn't been properly trained by the system yet.
She hasn't been corrupted. So she looks at this little boy and she just naturally thinks, oh, I'll teach him his ABCs.
She treats him the way you would treat any human child.
Exactly. So she starts teaching him the alphabet.
Yeah.
And then her husband, Hugh Auld, walks into the room.
And he completely flips out.
He shuts it down immediately.
But listen to what he actually says to her. This is the key. He doesn't just yell, stop it. He gives her this whole lecture on the structural mechanics of slavery in front of the kid.
He explains the unwritten rules. He says, and I'm paraphrasing the text here, but he says, if you teach that boy how to read, there would be no keeping him.
Right.
He says, quote, it would forever unfit him to be a slave.
Unfit him to be a slave.
And Douglas is just standing right there absorbing all of this. And suddenly, his entire understanding of the world clarifies.
He realizes, wait a minute, the white man isn't inherently magic or superior.
He's just hoarding information.
It's the inverted incentive. Douglas realizes in a flash that if the master is this terrified of knowledge, then knowledge itself must be the absolute key to freedom.
Davis points out that this is the exact moment this system accidentally reveals its own fatal vulnerability.
The embargo backfires.
Completely. Douglas writes, I instinctively assented to the proposition. He realizes that his only path to liberation is straight through the alphabet.
And this is a really huge, and this is honestly where I think doing a deep dive like this really matters.
Yeah.
We usually stop the historical story right there.
We do.
We tell kids, oh, he learned to read and then he was free, yay books. It's very triumphant.
Right. It's the reading rainbow version of history. It wraps up nicely.
But Davis forces us to look at the immediate aftermath of that knowledge. And the outcome wasn't joy.
Oh, it was massive depression.
It was pure psychological torture.
This is the profound paradox of consciousness. Davis explains that as Douglas read more, he actually got his hands on this book of speeches called The Columbian Orator.
Right.
As he read these arguments for liberty, he began to finally understand the true scope of his oppression.
He saw the Matrix.
He understood that slavery wasn't just some natural fact of the universe. It was a man-made, constructed injustice.
And understanding that reality made his daily life completely unbearable.
He actually says in his narrative, I would at times feel that learning to read had been a curse rather than a blessing.
A curse. Because before he learned to read, he was at least in the dark.
He was oblivious.
Now he's in the light, but the light is just showing him the walls of a cage.
He says it opened my eyes to the horrible pit, but to no ladder upon which to get out.
That is just a terrifying visual. Being stuck at the bottom of a deep pit, and someone finally turns on a flashlight, but there's absolutely no rope to climb.
And this is a highly sophisticated philosophical point that Davis is making here. Consciousness always precedes liberation.
You have to know you're trapped to want out.
Right. But the gap between knowing you are a free mind and actually being physically free in the world, that gap is a valley of death.
Douglas even says he envied his fellow slaves for their stupidity.
Because they were happier.
Because they were numb.
Exactly. He writes that the very idea of freedom started to torment him. He says it looked from every star, it smiled in every calm, breathed in every wind, and moved in every storm.
Once you develop the mind of a free human being treated daily like a brute animal is a type of psychological agony that is honestly worse than the physical whip. So the system tries its best to break the physical body, but if the mind manages to wake up, the mind just breaks itself against the bars of the cage.
Until, and this is a crucial pivot in Davis's analysis, until that despair finally metabolizes into resistance.
You have to pass all the way through the misery to get to the fight.
Yes.
Which brings us perfectly to phase 3 of our roadmap, feedback loops.
Right.
Because if the mind waking up is the biggest threat we have to talk about one of the most powerful institutional tools the system used to prevent that from happening, which is religion.
Institutional religion, in the specific context of American slavery, is this fascinating dual-use technology.
It's a weapon.
It is a weapon, but it's a weapon that can actually be picked up and fired by either side.
Let's start with the pacification side, the pacification mechanism. Davis brings up Marx's famous quote.
Religion is the opium of the people.
Right. And people constantly misunderstand that quote today. They think it means religion is this crazy drug that makes you hallucinate things.
But Marx meant it in the medical sense of his time. It's a painkiller.
It's an analgesic.
It dulls the extreme pain of the whip. It systematically teaches you to accept your suffering in this material world because you believe you will be heavily rewarded in the next world.
It projects all your perfectly natural desires for freedom into the afterlife.
So the logic becomes, I'm a slave right now, sure, but when I die, I'll walk on streets of gold in heaven.
It's what Davis calls a wish dream.
A wish dream. And the slave masters deeply understood this psychology. They didn't just passively allow their slaves to be vaguely religious.
They actively engineered the theology to serve the economy.
Yes. Davis cites Kenneth Stamp's work, The Peculiar Institution here, to talk about the concept of the censored Bible.
This honestly blew my mind when I read it. I always assumed the masters just wouldn't let them read the Bible at all because reading was illegal. But you're saying they actually edited the text?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
The plantation owners who, remember, proudly called themselves devout, civilized Christians would heavily curate the sermons the slaves heard.
They handpicked the verses.
They emphasize very specific scriptures. Servants, obey your masters. Or verses like, he that knoweth his master's will and doeth it not shall be beaten with many stripes.
They literally turned God into an overseer.
They made the creator of the universe a senior partner in the plantation firm.
Wow.
The structural message was both brilliant and totally diabolical.
Because it raises the stakes of disobedience.
Exactly. If you run away, if you break a farming tool, if you talk back to the overseer, you aren't just breaking a workplace rule.
You are actively sinning.
You are personally offending God.
That is a massive psychological firewall. It is one thing to decide to disobey a man who is whipping you. It is entirely another thing to risk eternal damnation to disobey God.
They desperately wanted to manufacture the pious slave, the slave who would proudly never strike a white man because he was too afraid of hellfire.
But as we know, systems have glitches.
Always.
You can tightly censor the Sunday sermon, but you cannot completely control the core text once people figure out how to read it.
And this is exactly where the glitch happens in the religious feedback loop. Slaves like Nat Turner, Denmark, Vesey, and Frederick Douglass, they eventually got their hands on the uncensored version.
The whole book.
The whole book. And what did they find hiding in there?
They found the Old Testament. They found the book of Exodus.
They found the story of the Israelites. A whole population of people kept in brutal bondage. A pharaoh who stubbornly wouldn't let them go.
And crucially, a God who did not say, servants obey your pharaoh.
Right. A God who sent devastating plagues to wreck the economy. A God who literally drowned the slave catchers in the Red Sea.
That is a completely different vibe from be humble and take your whipping.
It is the raw theology of resistance. Davis points out that these literate slaves structurally redirected the wish dream.
They stopped looking for freedom up in heaven and started looking for physical freedom right here on earth.
Exactly. When Douglass looked at Nat Turner's rebellion, which was violent and bloody and absolutely terrifying to the white population,
He didn't see a criminal act.
he saw the righteous judgment of God acting in history.
So the institution of religion flips overnight from being a tool of pacification to a tool of literal war.
Yes. But there is another vital layer to Davis's religious critique here, and it's actually about the masters themselves.
Which feeds right into our crisis in perception regarding individual morality.
Exactly. You're thinking of the hypocrisy of Master Thomas Auld.
Yes. This story is incredible. So Douglass is watching his master, Thomas Auld, attend this big Methodist revival meeting.
A religious camp meeting.
Auld goes to the meeting, he cries, he prays, he supposedly, quote, gets religion.
He has a full conversion experience.
And Douglass, as an observer, thinks, okay, this is a good thing. Now that he's a real Christian, maybe he'll be nicer to us. Maybe he'll even free us.
Which is a completely logical thought process. If Christianity is fundamentally about love and brotherhood, then a true conversion should naturally lead to kindness.
But what actually happened?
He got meaner.
He became measurably more cruel.
Why? Why did religion make him worse?
Because suddenly he had divine sanction for his cruelty.
Exactly. Before he got religious, maybe he felt a little bit of natural human guilt about whipping a woman.
But after he got saved.
After he was religious, he could justify every single blow with a scripture verse. Davis actually quotes all defending his actions, saying, quote, "I have not parted with my sense. I shall hold my slaves and go to heaven too."
I shall hold my slaves and go to heaven too. I mean, that is the core structural insight right there.
It is.
Religion just became the ideological bridge. It bridged the glaring gap between the ideal of all men are created equal and the economic reality of I legally own you.
It allowed the master to brutally extract labor all day and still sleep soundly at night. It sanitized the entire system.
So we've mapped out the design, the incentives, and the religious feedback loops. But that raises a practical question. How do you actually enforce this system day to day?
Right, because eventually Bible verses aren't enough.
Eventually, people are going to rebel, physical violence.
Enter phase 4 of our deep dive. Persistence and the specific institutional figure of the slave breaker.
We have to talk about Edward Covey.
Edward Covey. In the Douglas narrative, Covey is essentially the villain's villain.
He's the guy the masters call when they have a problem.
He's a poor white farmer who has built this very specific reputation. If you are a master and you have a slave who is being impudent.
Meaning he has too much personality, too much independent will.
Right. He's quote-unquote acting free. You rent that slave to Edward Covey for a year.
You send him away to be broken. Literally like breaking a wild horse.
Exactly. And Douglas is sent to Covey's farm. He's just a teenager at this point.
But he's been reading. He's getting a little too aware.
So he goes to Covey. And Covey's methods are highly, highly systematic.
It's obviously violence. He whips Douglas constantly for any minor infraction, but it's not just the whip, it's the labor.
It's total physical exhaustion. The design is to work them from before dawn until long past midnight.
Work in the freezing rain, work in the snow.
The institutional goal is to work the human body so incredibly hard that the brain has absolutely zero energy left to think.
Because if you are practically catatonic with exhaustion, you cannot plot an escape route. You can't ponder Hegelian philosophy. You just sleep.
But the thing that really freaks me out about Covey, the element that Davis really zeroes in on, is the surveillance.
The psychological warfare.
Douglas explicitly calls him the snake.
The snake.
Yeah.
You have to tell the listener why he called him that.
Because Covey would literally spend his afternoons crawling on his belly through the wet cornfields.
I just need everyone to stop and picture that reality.
It is genuinely insane behavior.
You are a grown adult man, a free white farmer. You are supposedly a member of the superior ruling race.
Right.
And you're spending your Tuesday afternoon slithering on your stomach in the mud, hiding behind tree stumps, just trying to catch a half-starved teenager taking a 5-minute break.
It's pathetic. It is deeply weird and pathetic.
But this is where Davis makes her brilliant psychological turn. We always focus heavily on what Covey did to the enslaved people.
We look at the victim.
But Davis says, look at what the system did to Covey.
It completely dehumanized him.
Yes. To successfully treat Douglas like a beast of burden, Covey had to literally become a beast himself.
He had to abandon every shred of human dignity. He had to become a liar, a sneak, a deceiver crawling in the dirt.
Davis asks the listener a profound question here. Who is the actual non-human in this scenario?
It's the vicious circle rearing its head again. The institutional system actually requires a dedicated class of enforcers who are willing to completely debase themselves just to keep the economic engine running.
Covey genuinely thinks he is the master. He thinks he is the one with all the power.
But in structural reality, he is just a creature of the system, acting out this grotesque, predetermined role. He's a fixture of the system just as much as Douglas is.
Which brings us perfectly to the climax of the narrative and phase 5 of our roadmap, interconnection.
The master-slave dialectic.
Yes. And we are going to get just a little bit Hegelian here, but we promise to keep it grounded.
Hegel, the German philosopher.
Right. Davis uses Hegel's phenomenology of mind to explain this interconnection. Hegel argued that the master and the slave are permanently locked in this weird, twisted dependency.
Because we usually think of it as a simple binary. Master equals completely independent. Slave equals completely dependent.
The master has all the money, the big house, the legal power. The slave desperately needs the master just for basic food and shelter.
But Davis flips that entirely. She argues using Hegel's logic that the master is actually the dependent one.
Think about a modern CEO who physically cannot convert a PDF without calling his assistant.
Or a toddler who thinks he's the king of a house but cannot actually feed himself.
The master literally produces nothing of value.
The slave grows the food. The slave physically builds the mansion. The slave weaves the clothes. The slave is the essential buffer zone between the master and the harsh realities of the natural world.
If the enslaved population just vanished overnight, the masters would literally starve to death in their big houses.
But if the masters vanished...
The slaves would be totally fine. They already know how to farm the land.
Exactly. So the master's supposed independence is a complete illusion. And subconsciously he knows it.
He needs the slave not just for the free labor, but psychologically to recognize him as a master.
Right. You cannot be a king if you don't have any subjects acknowledging your crown.
And this abstract theoretical dependency becomes incredibly literal and physical in the famous fight between Douglas and Covey.
The fight scene? We absolutely need to walk through the mechanics of this.
So it's August. It's the brutally hot Maryland summer. Douglas is out working in the treading yard, and he just collapses from heat stroke.
And Covey, being Covey, walks over, kicks him in the ribs, and orders him to get up and keep working.
Douglas eventually crawls away into the woods, goes back to his legal owner, Thomas Auld, to beg for protection, gets completely rejected and sent back.
So he returns to Covey's farm on a Sunday, and then comes Monday morning.
Right. Douglas says the, quote, fighting madness had finally come upon him.
So Monday morning, Covey walks into the stable, holding a rope, trying to catch Douglas off guard, to tie him up for a massive whipping.
And traditionally, structurally, this is exactly where the slave submits. This is the script everyone has been forced to memorize.
But Douglas decides to go completely off script. Instead of submitting, he turns around and grabs Covey by the throat.
He fights back, and we're not talking about a quick shove or a brief scuffle.
No, this is a vicious 2-hour brawl in the dirt.
It's a battle for survival. And watch carefully what happens to Covey in this moment. The supposedly strong, independent, terrifying master. What does he immediately do?
He panics. He starts trembling.
He literally calls out for help.
He screams for his cousin Hughes to come save him.
And Douglas just kicks Hughes right in the chest and knocks him out of the fight.
So then Covey screams for another enslaved man named Bill. He says, "Bill, help me hold him."
And Bill says, and I just love this line so much, Bill looks at him and says, "My master hired me here to work and not to help you whip Frederick."
And Bill just casually walks away,
leaving Covey totally alone.
The entire illusion of his supreme authority has just evaporated into thin air. He is physically struggling with a human being he legally considers a thing.
And the thing is winning the fight.
The fight finally ends in a stalemate. Douglas is not whipped. And the incredible part is Covey never attempts to whip him again for the rest of his time there.
Why? I mean, why didn't Covey just shoot him on the spot? Or call the local sheriff to have him executed?
Because of the reputation economy.
His brand as the ultimate slave breaker.
Exactly. If Covey admits to the authorities that he was cleanly beaten in a fair fight by teenage slaves, his entire business model is ruined.
No one would ever rent him a slave again.
So he is forced to just swallow his pride. He has to pretend he won the fight to save face.
He says something like, "Oh, I would have whipped you worse if you hadn't resisted."
A total bluster, but the actual power dynamic has shifted permanently.
Davis concludes this section by pointing out that this exact moment, the physical fight itself, is the actual realization of freedom.
Yes. Douglas writes, "I was a slave in form, but not in fact."
Freedom wasn't some piece of paper. It wasn't waiting around for the Emancipation Proclamation. It was the physical act of grabbing the oppressor's throat.
Freedom is a verb. It is the continuous act of resistance.
The master is always perpetually on the verge of becoming the slave.
And the slave is always on the verge of becoming the master.
It is a totally dynamic, ongoing struggle, not a static legal status.
Precisely.
That honestly is the big aha moment for me in reading this, because we are so conditioned to think of freedom as a noun, like I have freedom in my pocket.
A position.
But Davis is forcefully saying, no, you do freedom. You practice freedom through resistance.
Yes.
Okay, so we have fully mapped this system.
We've
looked at the hidden euphemisms in the Constitution. The spatial alienation of Betsy Bailey, the strategic weaponization of the censored Bible, the totally pathetic nature of the enforcer class, and the extreme fragility of the master's power.
We have thoroughly diagnosed the machine.
So now we have to ask the specific question we ask at the end of every one of these deep dives.
Lay it on me.
What is the crisis in perception here?
The crisis in perception is that we are still looking at the concept of freedom entirely through the eyes of the master rather than the eyes of the slave.
Unpack that a little bit. What do you mean?
There are 4 distinct layers to this misperception. First, we misperceive freedom itself. We perceive it as an abstract ideal. We look up at the Statue of Liberty or we read the Constitution and we just think, okay, we're free. We treat freedom as a static object that was permanently granted to us by the law.
But that's a dangerous hallucination.
It is. The crisis is failing to recognize that freedom is a dynamic daily struggle rooted in brutal material conditions. The founders casually wrote the word liberty while actively owning human beings. Their version of liberty was a pure abstraction. True freedom requires the friction of constant resistance.
And we also deeply misperceive the institutions themselves.
Yes. The second layer is narrative obscurity. We focus all our attention on the great men of history, but we completely miss the intentional institutional design of unfreedom that was absolutely required to sustain their economy. We look at the beautiful marble monument, but we conveniently ignore the foundation of bones it was built on. We ignore the grandmother discarded in the woods.
And we focus way too much on individual morality, right? Like asking, was he a nice master?
That is the third layer, and it's the biggest trap. We ask questions like, was Jefferson a fundamentally good guy? Or was Edward Covey just a bad apple in an otherwise okay system? This obsession with individual morality completely hides the structural design. The crisis is failing to see that the master literally cannot be kind and remain a master. The economic system actively requires the snake. It demands the non-human. If you choose to be a truly good master, you instantly cease to be a master.
And what's the final blind spot?
The fourth layer is dialectical blindness. We look at the oppressor and we see someone powerful, independent, and self-sustaining. We fail entirely to perceive their absolute, desperate dependency on the oppressed, for their wealth, their identity, and their very survival. We are tricked into thinking power only flows down from the top.
In reality, power is constantly being held up from below.
Exactly. And when the bottom finally decides to move,
The whole structure folds.
the structure collapses.
So truly seeing clearly, actually fixing this crisis in perception means realizing that the system was always explicitly designed to alienate us from our own freedom. And that true vision requires seeing active resistance not as trouble or disorder, but as the most authentic act of becoming fully human.
It is really the only place to land.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.